My fiancée told me she wasn't sure about marrying me after 5 years, then joked in front of everyone, if you were richer, I'd say yes. So I chose to end everything. A casual Friday night, a joke about wedding costs. That's all it took for my fiancée to gut punch me with a single sentence. I'd spent 5 years building a life with her, but in that moment, I realized it was all built on sand. We were out with friends at a busy bar in downtown Chicago, the air thick with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Someone at our table made a light-hearted remark about wedding expenses, and everyone chuckled. But then Olivia, my fiancée, turned to me, a playful smile on her face, and said, "Well, if Ethan were richer, I wouldn't even have to think twice." The table erupted, but my smile felt like a mask. Inside, something just snapped. That comment just echoed in my head for days. I couldn't shake the chilling thought that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't joking at all. The laughter had just given her permission to finally say it out loud. "My name's Ethan, I'm 32. Olivia and I had been together since our mid-20s. We met through mutual friends at a backyard barbecue, one of those perfect summer days when everything just clicks. She was funny, smart, ambitious. We connected instantly. For the first couple of years, it was all so easy. Weekends meant hiking, trying new restaurants we probably couldn't afford, or binging shows until 3 a.m. It felt like we were truly building something, a life together. Around year 3, we moved in. I had a solid job at a mid-sized construction company, working my way up from site supervisor to project coordinator. The pay was decent. Nothing spectacular, but enough for our half of a nice apartment, a vacation once a year, and no real stress about bills. Olivia worked in marketing at a tech startup, and her salary was pretty close to mine. We weren't struggling, but we weren't exactly living large either. That never seemed to matter, until it suddenly did. The engagement happened about 8 months before that night at the bar. I proposed at this little cabin we'd rented in upstate New York. Nothing fancy, but meaningful because it was where we spent our first anniversary. She said yes immediately, cried happy tears, called her mom right away. For the first few weeks, everything felt perfect. We'd talk about the future, about maybe buying a house someday, about the life we wanted. But then the wedding planning started, and I began to notice things shifting. Olivia became obsessed with Pinterest boards and wedding blogs. She'd show me venues that cost more than my car, dresses that required a payment plan, photographers whose rates made my eyes water. Every time I gently suggested something more budget-friendly, she'd give me this look, like I'd just suggested we get married at a gas station. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event, Ethan," she'd say. "We can't cheap out on our wedding." I tried to explain I wasn't trying to cheap out. I just wanted to be realistic about what we could actually afford without going into massive debt. That's when the comparisons started. Her friend, Chloe, had just gotten engaged to some guy in finance, and apparently, their wedding budget was triple what we were looking at. Another friend was marrying a doctor and planning a destination wedding in Paris. Olivia would scroll through their Instagram posts and sigh, making little comments about how beautiful everything looked, how she wished we could do something like that. At first, I brushed it off as normal wedding stress. Everyone wants their day to be special, right? But it kept escalating. She started making comments about my job. Nothing direct at first, just little hints here and there. "Have you thought about looking for something that pays better, or do you think you'll ever move up to management?" I'd been pretty content with my career trajectory, but suddenly I felt like I was being measured against some invisible standard I didn't even know existed. The thing is, I wasn't some deadbeat. I showed up to work every day, paid my half of everything, never asked her to cover for me. We'd always operated as equals financially, but somewhere along the way, equals stopped being enough. She wanted more, and I was starting to feel like the obstacle preventing her from getting it. About 2 months before that night at the bar, we had our first real fight about money. She wanted to book this venue that was way outside our budget. When I said we couldn't afford it, she accused me of not caring about the wedding. "If this mattered to you, you'd find a way to make it work," she'd said. I just remembered staring at her, wondering when caring about someone became synonymous with spending money you don't have. We didn't talk for 2 days after that fight. When we finally did, neither of us really apologized. We just kind of swept it under the rug and moved on. But looking back, that should have been my first real warning sign. My friend Mike was actually at the bar that Friday night. We'd grab beers after work sometimes, and he'd become part of our wider friend group. When Olivia made her comment about me being richer, I glanced around the table and caught Mike's eyes. He wasn't laughing. He looked almost angry on my behalf, and that reaction stuck with me more than the laughter did. I excused myself to the bathroom just to get a minute alone. Standing there at the sink, I looked at myself in the mirror and felt something I'd never felt in our relationship before. I felt small. Not because of my income or my job, but because the person I was planning to spend my life with had just reduced my worth to a dollar amount in front of people we knew. When I came back to the table, Olivia was laughing at something else entirely, completely unbothered. She squeezed my hand when I sat down. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just told a room full of people that the only thing standing between her and total commitment was my bank account. We didn't talk about it on the ride home. I didn't bring it up that night because I honestly didn't know where to start. How do you tell someone that they've made you feel worthless without sounding overly sensitive? How do you explain that a joke cut deeper than any serious argument ever had? My coworker Alex called me the next morning. He hadn't been at the bar, but apparently, word travels fast in our social circle. He'd heard about Olivia's comment from someone who was there, and he wanted to check in. Heard what Olivia said last night, man. You really okay with that? He asked. I didn't have a good answer. The truth was, I wasn't okay with it. I wasn't okay with any of it. For 5 years, I thought we were building a partnership based on love, respect, and shared goals. But somewhere along the way, our relationship had become transactional. I'd become a line item on a budget sheet, constantly being evaluated against what I could provide rather than who I was. Have you ever felt like you had to prove your worth to someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally? Because that's exactly where I found myself, and I didn't know how to climb out of that hole. The days after that bar incident felt different, like I was seeing everything through a new lens. I couldn't stop replaying Olivia's comment, analyzing the tone, the timing, the fact that she'd said it so casually in front of people who knew us. What bothered me most wasn't even the words themselves. It was how comfortable she'd been saying them. Like it was just an obvious truth that everyone already understood. I tried to go about my normal routine, but everything felt off. We'd have breakfast, and I'd wonder if she was calculating how much I contributed to groceries. We'd watch TV at night, and I'd catch myself thinking about whether she was comparing our apartment to her friends' places. About 3 days after the bar, I finally tried to bring it up. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, and I just asked her straight out if she'd meant what she said. Olivia looked genuinely confused for a second, like she didn't even remember the comment. When I reminded her, she laughed it off immediately. Oh my God, Ethan, that was obviously a joke, she said. You're being way too sensitive about this. I pushed back, told her it didn't feel like a joke to me, that it actually hurt. She rolled her eyes and said I was making a big deal out of nothing. That everyone makes those kinds of comments, and no one takes them seriously. I just want us to be stable, she added. Is that really so terrible? The problem was, we were stable. We paid our bills. We had savings. We weren't drowning in debt. But stable apparently wasn't the same as wealthy. And I was starting to realize that's what she actually wanted. That same weekend, Mike and I met up at our usual spot, this dive bar near the construction office in Dallas. I must have looked rough because he ordered me a whiskey instead of my usual beer without even asking. I told him about the conversation with Olivia, about how she dismissed my feelings and turned it around to make me seem oversensitive. Mike listened quietly, spinning his glass on the bar top, and then he said something that hit me hard. You really want to spend your life with someone who measures your worth by your paycheck? He asked. Because I'm telling you right now, after the wedding, it's only going to get worse. Mike had been through a rough divorce a few years back, and his ex-wife had been similar, always wanting more, always comparing their life to other couples. He told me once that he'd spent years trying to be enough for someone who had no intention of ever being satisfied. Sitting there in that dim bar, watching my friend's face as he warned me about a future I could still avoid, I felt something shift. This wasn't just wedding stress or cold feet. This was a fundamental problem with how Olivia saw me, saw us, saw what a partnership should be. The next few weeks were tense. Olivia started pushing harder on the wedding planning. But now, every conversation felt loaded. She'd bring up venue options, and I'd hear an unspoken criticism of what I could afford. She'd show me photographer portfolios, and I'd catch myself wondering if she was wishing I made enough to hire the expensive one without discussion. Then, she started bringing up joint bank accounts. She framed it as a practical step since we were getting married anyway. But something about the timing felt wrong. We'd never combined finances before. Always kept things separate and just split shared expenses. Now suddenly she wanted full access to everything. Wanted to know exactly what I made, what I spent, what I saved. When I hesitated, she got defensive, asking if I didn't trust her. It wasn't about trust. It was about feeling like I was being audited rather than loved. She also ramped up the comments about my career. She'd mentioned job postings she'd seen, suggested I talk to her friend's husband about opportunities at his company, asked if I'd considered going back to school for a business degree. None of it was framed as criticism, but it all carried the same underlying message, that what I was doing wasn't enough. One night, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I came home to find Olivia on the couch surrounded by wedding magazines and her laptop open to some budgeting spreadsheet. She looked up at me with this expectant expression and said she'd been crunching numbers. According to her calculations, if we both took on extra work and I asked for a raise, we could maybe afford the wedding she actually wanted. Not the scaled-down version we'd been planning, but the real thing with the nice venue and the good photographer and all the details that mattered to her. I just stood there in the doorway, still in my work boots, covered in dust from the job site, and felt absolutely exhausted. Not physically tired, but emotionally drained from constantly being made to feel inadequate. I told her I needed to take a shower and left the room before she could see how close I was to losing it completely. Standing under the hot water, I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't spend the rest of my life feeling like a disappointment because I chose a stable career I actually enjoyed over one that just paid better. When is it okay to walk away from someone you love? I'd been asking myself that question for weeks, and I still didn't have a clear answer. All I knew was that love shouldn't feel like a performance review, and partnership shouldn't come with a price tag. That weekend, I called my mom, Sharon. I hadn't told my family much about what was going on because I guess part of me was embarrassed. My mom raised me and my sister, Jessica, on a teacher's salary after my dad left when I was 10. She'd always taught us that character mattered more than money, that a good work ethic and treating people right were what defined success. Hearing myself explain the situation to her, I felt like I was betraying everything she'd raised me to believe. I told her about the comment at the bar, about Olivia's constant focus on money, about how I was starting to feel like a financial plan rather than a partner. My mom was quiet for a long moment, and then her voice came through the phone different than usual, not soft, but firm. She told me she'd watched my aunt go through something similar years ago. Marrying a man who saw her as a means to an end rather than a person he loved. "Sweetheart, I've seen this kind of relationship before," she said. "And I'm telling you, it doesn't end well." She reminded me that my dad had left chasing some idea of a better life. Always wanting more, never satisfied with what he had. She'd spent years trying to be enough for someone who didn't know how to be content. And she didn't want to see me make the same mistake. After that call, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly, more like clarity. I'd been so focused on trying to make Olivia happy, on trying to be what she wanted, that I'd lost sight of whether this relationship was actually making me happy. That night, lying in bed next to Olivia while she scrolled through wedding hashtags on Instagram, I made a decision. I needed to have one final, completely honest conversation with her. Not a fight, not a discussion that could be dismissed or minimized, but a real moment of truth where I asked her directly what she wanted from this marriage. Because if the answer was anything other than me, exactly as I was, then we had a serious problem. I waited until Sunday morning to have the conversation. Olivia was in a good mood, making coffee and scrolling through brunch spots on her phone, and I almost chickened out. But I knew if I didn't do this now, I'd keep putting it off until we were standing at the altar and it was too late. I sat down across from her at our small kitchen table and asked her to put the phone down because we needed to talk. She must have sensed something in my tone because her smile faded immediately. I took a breath and asked her the question that had been eating at me for weeks. Are you having doubts about marrying me, or are you having doubts because I don't make enough money? The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Olivia opened her mouth, closed it, then looked down at her coffee mug. She didn't answer right away, and honestly, that told me everything I needed to know. When she finally spoke, she tried to explain that it wasn't about the money exactly. It was about security and future and making sure we could have the life she'd always imagined. But the more she talked, the clearer it became that the life she'd imagined required a financial foundation I couldn't provide, at least not on my current trajectory. She never said she didn't love me, but she also never said the money didn't matter. That non-answer was its own kind of answer. The conversation went in circles for almost an hour. I tried to explain how her comments had made me feel, how exhausting it was to constantly be measured against some invisible standard. She got defensive, said I was twisting her words, that she'd never meant to make me feel bad about myself. But when I pointed out specific examples, the venue argument, the constant career suggestions, the comment at the bar, she couldn't really deny the pattern. Eventually, she started crying, saying she didn't want to break up, but she also didn't know how to stop worrying about money. I felt bad seeing her upset. But I also felt oddly calm. For the first time in months, we were at least being honest with each other, even if that honesty was painful. I told her I couldn't marry someone who saw me as a work in progress, someone who needed to be fixed or upgraded before I was good enough. She insisted that's not how she saw me, but her actions over the past year told a different story. We ended that conversation without any resolution, just an agreement to take some space and think about what we really wanted. My mom called me later that afternoon. I'd texted her that morning saying I was going to talk to Olivia, and she wanted to check in. I told her how it went, about Olivia's non-answer and the circular conversation that went nowhere. My mom was quiet for a moment, then said something I'll never forget. Love shouldn't come with conditions, sweetheart. If someone can't accept you as you are right now, they're not going to suddenly accept you after a wedding. My sister, Jessica, got involved, too. She'd never been Olivia's biggest fan, and when I told her what was happening, she didn't hold back. She said she'd noticed Olivia's behavior at family dinners. The way she'd make little comments about other people's houses or cars, always comparing and calculating. You deserve someone who's proud of you for who you are, not disappointed in you for who you're not, Jessica said. Hearing my family's perspective helped solidify what I already knew deep down. This wasn't a rough patch we could work through. This was a fundamental incompatibility in values. If someone needs you to change before they can fully commit, are they really committing to you at all? The next few days were weird. Olivia and I were still living in the same apartment but barely talking. She'd sleep on the couch some nights, claiming she fell asleep watching TV, but we both knew she was avoiding me. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I actually wanted from life, from a partner, from marriage. I realized I wanted someone who was excited about building a life together, not someone who was waiting for me to become someone else before the real life could start. About a week after our big conversation, I made the decision. I told Olivia we needed to call off the wedding. She didn't seem surprised, just sad, and maybe a little relieved. We both knew it was coming. She tried one last time to convince me we could make it work, that she'd try to care less about money. But we both knew that wasn't realistic. You can't just turn off fundamental values and expectations. We spent the next month navigating the painful logistics of separating, canceling the venue, returning deposits where we could, dividing up our stuff. Our lease was actually up in about 8 weeks, so we agreed she'd stay in the apartment until it expired, and I'd move out right away. My buddy Mike helped me move my things to a smaller place across town in Austin, a one-bedroom that was nothing fancy, but felt like mine in a way our shared apartment never really had. The hardest part wasn't the physical separation. It was grieving the future I'd imagined. 5 years is a long time, and I'd built so many plans around this person, around this relationship. But I also felt something unexpected as I settled into my new place. I felt lighter. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't constantly worried about being enough. I wasn't measuring myself against impossible standards or apologizing for choices that were perfectly reasonable. I started seeing a therapist, mostly to process everything and make sure I wasn't carrying this damage into whatever came next. My therapist helped me understand that Olivia probably wasn't a bad person. She just wanted something I couldn't give her, and that's okay. People can be incompatible without anyone being the villain. But she also validated that I'd made the right choice, that staying in a relationship where you feel fundamentally inadequate is a recipe for misery. Through mutual friends, I heard that Olivia was doing okay, focusing on her career and going out more with her single friends. Part of me hoped she'd find whatever it was she was looking for, whether that was a richer partner or maybe just learning to value things beyond money. But mostly, I try not to think about her at all. 6 months after everything ended, I was sitting in my apartment on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and actually feeling peaceful. My mom called to check in, like she did most weekends. And during our conversation, I realized something important. Olivia had implied I'd be perfect if I was richer. Like wealth was the missing piece that would complete me. But the truth I'd learned through all this pain was simpler and more profound. The right relationship isn't one where you have to become someone else to be worthy of love. It's one where who you already are is exactly enough. I wasn't rich, probably never would be, and I'd made peace with that. I had a job I was good at, family who loved me, friends who had my back, and a clear sense of my own values. That turned out to be worth more than any bank account ever could be. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored because I wanted so badly for things to work. The comparisons, the hints about my career, the way she talked about our relationship in terms of what it could provide rather than what it was. Love shouldn't require an upgrade or a promotion or a bigger paycheck to be real. If I could go back and tell myself one thing on that night at the bar, it would be this: when someone shows you who they are and what they value, believe them the first time. Don't wait for the second comment, the third hint, the 100 small cuts that eventually bleed you dry. You deserve someone who celebrates you as you are, not someone who sees you as a rough draft waiting to be edited into something better. What would you have done in my situation?